Hello, I'm Tomady, and in this tutorial I'm going to be showing you how to create dynamic key prompts in the Godot engine. As you can see, I have this simple scene where I can move around, jump around, and if I get to the door, I get a key prompt saying press E to interact. And if I change E to something like F, the prompt will now say press F to interact. That's how it works. I have a node 2D called interact as a child node of the player. The interact node contains a control node for the UI and an area 2D that shows and hides the UI. Here's how to make this. Let's start with creating a control node for the UI. The way you set this up doesn't really matter if you're going to be attaching it to the player, since we're going to be repositioning this in the player scene. If you want to make the UI independent of the player, you're going to need to separate these two nodes. And if you want to, for example, show the prompts on top of the screen, you can use this layout, an HFlow container with top wide selected, so it's always on top of the screen and stretched to 100% width. Alignment center, so the button is centered. A panel container containing your texture for the key prompt. For me, I just have a simple 64 by 64 texture I made. Within the panel container, we have the key label, and as a sibling to our panel container, I have a message label. For the panel container, I have the custom minimum size set to 64 by 64 because that's the size of my texture, and if I don't set this, it just looks weird. And now let's write some code in order to make our text within our key label dynamic. Here's the code. I'm going to keep it on the screen as I'm explaining what each line does. The key label is just a reference to the label. On ready, we call the init interact button that's defined under the process. We don't need that, so I'm going to delete it. Within the init interact button, we first get an array of actions for the name interact, because this is how it is defined in my project. And from this, I take the first one, the first item in an array, because I only have one button for each action, as you can see here. And what is returned here is exactly this, so E and physical, which is a problem because you can't just take the first key or the first character from this string, because you will then have issues with things such as space or enter, which doesn't have only one letter, which is why I wrote a helper function that I called substring until space. What this function does is it returns a string until it finds the first occurrence of empty space, which is exactly what we want for our key label. To test this, I'm going to write a couple of prints so you can see what I'm talking about. First, I'm going to print the interact key, and then the actual text of our key label after I call the substring until space. And when I run the project, we should see that the first thing is the whole thing that's defined in project settings, and the second string is the first string until the first space, so just E in this case. And if I were to change E, well, let me stop this. So if I were to change E to, for example, space and rerun the project, we're going to see that I get space for the label. This is also what will get shown here. Alright, now let's remove the prints. This is the logic for the label, and to get your actions for this label. But when do we show this label? For this, I have an interact controller. This will depend on your use case. If you're doing 3D, you will probably need to do raycasts or something like that. But for me, I kept it simple for this tutorial. I'm doing 2D, and for this I used an area 2D with collision shape 2D as a child. This will be your interact range. So depending on the size of this, let me enable collision shapes, then we can actually see it in the editor. You will see that as soon as these two collisions collide, the actual label will get shown on screen. And that's exactly what we want. So this is the code for the interact controller. It's quite simple. I set the interact UI, which is our control node, to invisible on start. This means I don't have to do this in the editor, but it doesn't matter, you can also do it in the editor. Then I have a function that I called toggle UI. It inverts the visible property of the interact UI. This way I can use only one function for both turning it visible and turning it invisible. Then you need to go to the node tab in your inspector, and we're going to be using area entered and area exited events. On area entered we want to call toggle UI, and on area exited I have toggle UI as well. If you want, you can split this to show and hide. So you would then call show on area entered and hide on area exited. Make sure for the mask of your area 2D for the interact controller, you have it set to the area 2D of your door or your interactable that the player can interact with. For me, this is on layer 3, so I set the interact controller to also have a mask of layer 3. So that's it for this tutorial. Thank you for watching, and if you want more content like this, or if you're interested in devlogs, you can subscribe to my channel. Bye!